Howdy folks, Shell Presto here with another entry in the public domain character redesign series. Today you'll get to watch me ink with a dip pen, hear me talk about redesigning characters for a different time period, and see me fail miserably not once, but twice at creating a background for this piece of artwork. The good news is, I do get it eventually. So this video is a perfect example of trying and failing and trying again. Not with the character, Dart, so much. I think he looks pretty awesome. Although you can be guaranteed there's still stuff wrong with him. That's coming from one of Marvel Comics' previous art directors. But that's a topic for another video. This was an interesting exercise. I had originally colored my traditionally inked drawing digitally, and I absolutely loved how it turned out. The coloring job on the character, Dart himself, was my standard digital coloring job, and for the background I was able to use a bunch of different texture brushes to get the Roman catacomb walls to look just right. At this point I'm doing that original ink job, and this is a rare treat. I'm inking with my dip pen and India ink. Well, Sumi A ink, but same difference. I love inking with a dip pen. You can get a lot of line variation, and it's just... okay, so you have to dip the pen to fill up on ink often, and you have to be very aware of the angle that you're holding the pen, especially in relation to the direction of the particular line that you're drawing. So it's a lot slower than inking with, say, a micron pen or any other fine liner. But while that slowness is a detriment to your output, working slowly and meticulously can be really, really relaxing. You can just zone out, and it allows you to sort of hyper-focus on your work. It's meditative. So far as inking with the dip pen goes, here's two major takeaways for you. One, you might notice that I'm holding my pen at a much lower angle. It's much closer to horizontal than my normal grip. And whenever I want to make a long line in one swoop, I turn the page, clear a lot of room, plant my elbow, and use my elbow as a pivot point to sweep my whole arm while making the line. Secondly, you can only move the pen in 3 directions, and for 2 of those you need a really, really light touch. With a dip pen, you drag your lines away from the pen point. If you push toward the pen point, like following an arrow, that sharp point will dig into your paper, get stuck, and probably splatter ink all over your nice artwork. Not cool. While dragging away, however, you can put a good bit of pressure on it to get a nice line width. Now, you're not supposed to do it, but if you use a supremely light touch, you can move the pen sideways to get really fine lines. But if it goes wrong, it can catch on the paper and splatter ink, too. So, well, don't say I didn't warn you. I say as I do it anyway. As a side note, if you ever tried a dip pen and didn't like it, the brand does make a difference, and different people prefer different brands. For example, a lot of comic artists swear by Hunt nibs, but I couldn't stand them. They felt too stiff. And Speedball felt too nimble. But that's to me. Lots of people love Speedball. I like Gillette for thick lines and Nico as my all-around go-to pen. And I use Sumi A ink, which has shellac in it, because it's the darkest ink I've encountered. I mean real country dark. And once it dries, so long as you didn't put it on too thick, it stays in place, no matter what medium you color with. I'm a former student of the art instruction schools. That's the mail-in correspondence school that no longer offers courses, not the fancy, super expensive art institutes in major cities like Philly or Pittsburgh. I tell you this because they used to have an annual art competition, and I wanted this picture of Dart as my entry, but the school only accepted traditional pieces for the contest. Recreating a piece of art that you've previously done well before is always a challenge, especially if you love how the original turned out. And the background on this piece just walloped me. I think because I inked Dart comic book style but didn't want to put any hard black lines in the background. It's a catacomb, so I wanted it to feel more organic. To start, I had the line art done already because I almost always prefer to draw on paper for my line work. The Copic coloring on Dart himself was pretty standard and uneventful for me. I tried to use a lot of rich, warm colors, except of course for the shadows. There you've got my usual purples. So, this is part of my public domain character redesign series. If you look, you can see that I used two different shades of brown, a deeper, richer mahogany color and a lighter, tanner, brickish color on the strap across his chest. It's supposed to look like an arrow, and that's because I was working on a character with an awesome backstory, but a pretty lame costume design. Okay, so this character is called Dart, and his real name is Caius Marcius. In his original appearance in Weird comics back in the 1940s, his backstory was that he was a Roman vigilante thousands of years ago. Think BC instead of AD. And that he squared off against a sorcerer who turned him into stone. Then, in a Captain America-esque thawing situation, he was freed from his stone state in the 40s and immediately and almost flawlessly transitioned to the modern day, adopting a modern last name, Wheeler, putting on a modern superhero costume, take a look at this generic number, and fighting crime. So, classic good idea, bad execution here. Since my husband Mike is hugely into history, that made this character quite enticing, so we weaved him into the Ascension Epoch quite nicely. And we take our time and really explore his transition to modern times and culture shock, starting with how no one speaks Latin anymore, and that his native Latin is outdated even among scholars and linguists. He came from a time where multiple gods were accepted as a fact of life, where harsh violence was the punishment for crime. Lots of good, rich fodder for stories there. At the time this video is posted, he hasn't appeared in a book yet, but we've got a lot of progress made on the book he'll appear in, which is the sequel to Copper Knights and Granite Men. And, well, if you've read Copper Knights and Granite Men, you can pretty easily imagine how a man whose greatest enemy turned him into a statue could fit pretty well into a Challenger Foundation story. So, all that said, I had to take that red-headed original Dart with the red arrow on his chest and redesign him for his native Roman time with something at least reminiscent of his costume. Hence the perhaps outlandish emblem on his belt. But hey, that triangular patch of hard leather is protecting his heart, so that's somewhat practical, right? I put the arrow pattern on his bracers too to hammer it home, and I really like how it turned out. Since the rest of his original costume was just the generic yellow superhero suit with baggy cut shirt and bright red boots and gloves, I ditched those and looked at Roman clothing that I just, well, liked. Here's where a couple good books and a lot of web searching is your friend. I have a wonderful book by John Peacock called The Chronicle of Western Costume that I crack open anytime I need to do a historical piece. There are only a few illustrations per time period, but they provide a great jumping off point. Next, a Google search for Roman belt images and Roman sandal images provided some inspiration. And while darts are likely more elaborate than the norm, he's supposed to be exceptional, even during his time period, and, well, what's the point of being an artist if you can't make a character look cool? But That's the key to historical costumes. Even if you're not trying to be super accurate, you should start with a bit of research. Books are great and images on search engines are plentiful. Then just heap your own style on top of that. Osprey does a number of books for various historical time periods too. Those are pretty great. Now I just need to work on Dart's modern costume. It will not be yellow. I guess I should say that I did indeed place in the 2016 Art Instruction School's annual art contest. Dart earned a third place award, among many third place awards, and a small cash prize. I was a little disappointed that it didn't hit second place, but you win some and you lose some. I had a first place prize in 2014 and claimed a second place in 2017, so I had a good run. And now the school, well, they say they aren't closed, but they aren't offering any classes anymore. Their official statement is essentially that they do not offer any programs or courses at this time. I could still do a video about my experience with the art instruction schools if you folks want me to, but unless I'm asked, I don't consider it a high priority because, yeah, I can't recommend or deter you all from something that currently doesn't exist. So far as making the background goes, I tried to do it with Copics first, but I just could not get the texture I wanted. I tried to lay down a light tan in a fast, streaky manner to maintain some of the texture, but that wasn't enough to convey an old cave wall. Ironically, I was covering such a wide area with the marker that the tip started to dry out. Not only because the marker was drying out, but also because I was coloring so fast, the tip couldn't absorb ink from its own barrel fast enough. You'll see me pull out the refill ink and start applying it directly to the brush tip as I color to make the ink load up faster. I decided it needed more texture, so I covered the entire wall in a mottled texture by dabbing that same light tan with the side of the brush all over the wall. That actually didn't help things, which I'll get to later. Then I made some uneven, jerky little scribbles and stipple dots with the markers, but that just looked wrong. It looked more like marble, or dirt and vines, or spider legs. Completely not what I was going for. I turned to colored pencils to get some more texture and gradated shading, and that helped, and was closer to what I wanted, but still not quite right. So then I pulled out the acrylics. I did the equivalent of stippling, but I didn't leave space between the dots, and instead created a massive wall of texture. Firstly, I carefully covered Dart in watercolor painter's masking tape. This is so dangerous. You should absolutely avoid trying this on something you've already colored. I mean, the tape isn't supposed to stick to the paper well, but if it did at all and tore the paper after I had spent so much time inking and coloring him, I would have been devastated. But I needed to paint with acrylics over him and couldn't risk him being painted on, so I did it anyway. Usually, you mask areas of a painting off before you've finished them. You use masking earlier in a painting. But I was on a deadline, so I threw caution to the wind, and fortunately, it worked out okay. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about this piece until we hit the point where you see me scrap the current background. I gave up failing on camera and finished the background off camera, but don't fret, because I detail how I did it at the end, and it turned out pretty nifty looking. Still, I failed twice before I got it. I'll be back at the end to show you how I ended up making the final background. So at this point, you can see that this just turned into a mess of texture, and it was not what I was going for, and I got frustrated, and I turned the camera off, and I tried my best to fix it off camera, and I eventually did, but I don't have that recorded. However, fret not, because I will document to you how I eventually succeeded. With some blood, sweat, and tears. Alright, there was no blood involved, thank goodness, because remember I was using that X-Acto knife. Still, I managed to get a nice texture in the end. This is what the finished piece ended up looking like. So how did we get there? Well, my biggest mistake was that I was adding so much texture that I lost a sense of direction in the wall. Now, usually you want something to go along with your perspective lines, so a wall would be somewhat horizontal. So I went back in with my acrylic paint, and I didn't get too much paint on the brush because I wanted the texture to show. If you have a lot of paint on the brush, you're going to lose your texture and it's going to be very smooth. I used my brush in a firm direction, and I just went back and forth horizontally until I recaptured the fact that this was a wall and had that horizontal look to it. Then I went in and dabbed my brush to add some texture back in, but being careful not to over texture the way that I had previously done. And then I just went back and forth between dabbing in some texture and very, very lightly with a dry brush going over that again to get that horizontal look in. So that's what I really needed, was that combination of texture combined with the horizontal lines which follow perspective, so they're not exactly horizontal, to just capture that this is a wall. This is behind him. This isn't like some kind of rug or something with a ridiculous amount of texture in it. Okay, so here I just want a little bit of variation in texture, so I take a perfectly clean paper towel and I just dab it into the wet paint, and that just gives me texture, but a different kind of texture than just dabbing the brush would give. And then here I want to introduce, one, I want to make the texture a little more prominent, and two, I want to introduce some whiter colors into there, so I'm dabbing with, I dabbed very, very lightly into paint with the paper towel, and then I'm sponging down onto a paper plate with the towel, and dabbing and dabbing and dabbing, so that I only have a tiny bit of paint left on the paper towel when I dab. I'm going to use this tiny gap in narration to say it would be really cool if you thumbs up or liked this video, and if you'd subscribe if you want to see future demonstrations and speed paints from me. And that you can tell me in the comments any suggestions or things you'd like to see in the future, or any questions you have about this piece for clarification in future videos. And here I just thought I'd show you what my palette looks like. I was just using paper plate. It was during the summer, so I had the nice 4th of July or Memorial Day design on it. And I'm just showing you how I lift paint up. And I'll switch back and forth a little bit, and I'll, you know, like I said, dab and make sure that I I have light paint applications for this so that I maintain the texture and that my layers aren't too thick. Because if my layers are too thick, you won't see any of the colors underneath. Likewise, when I am using acrylics, I prefer to use a piece of wax paper or a paper plate for my palette, just because I'm notorious for forgetting to clean my palettes when I use acrylics, and then it's really hard to scrub off. So, you know, if I do it with watercolors or gouache, it's not that big a deal. I can scrub my palette clean, but I can't do that with. Finally, and this probably made the biggest difference in how the background looked, I needed to add that comic booky element of some dark lines, which I didn't particularly want to do when I started, but it just didn't look right without it. So I used a micron, and it's a 1. Not the 1.0 that I use for inking, but I have a big, thick micron marker that's about the size of this Faber-Castell pen, but I could not find it for this demonstration, so I'm just using the Faber-Castell pen. I dragged the pen lightly to get line variation in the same direction that I had the horizontal or the in perspective lines going, to just give the essence of a rock face. Okay. And that tiny bit of thick black line that resembled a comic book really brought the whole piece back together. So here's the side-by-side comparison of the two pieces, the original digital coloring on the left and the Copic and acrylic coloring on the right. Which one's your favorite? I removed the blood for the contest because I just thought they'd like something a little more family-friendly since they published it in their magazine. I actually prefer the digitally painted one. My husband, however, really likes the Copic one. So perhaps you want to weigh in and say which one you like best. So most people, when they think of the art instruction schools, think of the little Draw Me ads that used to run in comic books and magazines. I went online to apply for mine. I hadn't seen an ad for them in years, but I do have the old Draw Me send-in things in a lot of my old comic books. A lot of the assignments were just good old, we give you a picture, you draw it, we see how you do and assess your skills. So there were a lot of assignments that were, you know, the painful, like draw this sheet of fabric. Some were even just copy this drawing. Some were, here's a outline and you have to mix paint. And a lot of, like, you know, technique copying and stuff like that to see that you could mix certain colors and go with certain color schemes and things like that. But it was good to learn the basics, and overall I really enjoyed that. There were some that were just like, here's a picture of a person, you draw the picture of the person. And there were, you know, like, draw the avocado. And this was painful because I did not like the paints that they gave me. The paints they gave me, they just, you could get some light washes out of them, but it was kind of like a mix between acrylic and watercolor. It might have even been the acrylic gouache, but it was very frustrating because the colors dried really, really fast. So you had to work fast to use the color that you had mixed, and I did okay, but I prefer other mediums. We'll draw the shoe. But occasionally you'd get an assignment that was just really fun. So my favorite assignment, not my final portfolio, because you got to draw whatever you, not whatever you wanted, but you had a lot more freedom with your final portfolio. But one of the assignments was to draw a medieval drawing. So I did bulwark from the Challenger Foundation, and this was the first time I had ever really drawn bulwark too, like a finished piece. I had sketches of what he'd look like, and he doesn't look like this in our books because he looks modern day. He has a superhero costume. Actually, he's right there, because I'm working on this big Challenger Foundation piece, which I also recorded and did on video. But yeah, I really enjoyed doing this one. This was the first really fun assignment I had from the art instruction schools. It doesn't help that I really like medieval fantasy, so drawing in that style worked out really well and was really fun. Like I said, if anyone wants to hear more about my time and experience with the art instruction schools, I would be happy to make a longer video. I just don't know how helpful it would be because they're not taking students right now, and in theory, if they ever did open back up, the course might be different. So, alright, that's all. Thanks for watching. Have an awesome day, and presto, over and out.